Good evening, everyone. Technically, as this is our EU stream, I have to count it as evening. The question is whether or not my stream is even working, because it does tend to mess up here. So I'm going to wait for the confirmation that it is functional before I start talking seriously. But we are having our DNF dual content today, and despite the fact that this is our EU stream, you will probably be able to find it created not only by me, but with the marker of NA, because we don't actually have our EU player immediately. Possibly not at all. As a result of this, you can be reasonably sure that if you are connecting from the Midwest United States or similar, that you will probably have a fine connection to all the people currently in the lounge. But we can't be sure that will continue, as this is the timing we expect normally to see EU players, and any who are familiar with our streams may just join anyway. That said, if their connection is good enough, it tends to be fine. If anyone is close enough to the Atlantic Ocean, it usually works out, we find. I forgot that control text caused that happen. Since the last time we've had such a stream, I've been working on multiple things. But the way in which we've been having different forms of success isn't what you'd exactly expect. This is another one of those games where the distance you hit your opponent from and the starting button you hit them with makes a lot of difference. So you'll find yourself watching a lot of online matches, watching a lot of online suggestions as to how to do your combos, and then finding that some of them just don't work in the situations you're being shown, or at least what it looks like to you doesn't work in the situation you're being shown. Kunoichi in particular is confusing this way because she has combos that specifically only work if your opponent is under a certain condition already. She also has a certain set that only work if your opponent was struck by your, I think, let's call that 2S, from a certain range, and another type where it only gets to continue the combo if they were a certain height in the air when you hit them. This isn't really uncommon for characters in games like this. The uncommon part is actually that there is any combo to be had at all. So, for a player who isn't necessarily used to this, they don't really have as many problems. They're not even thinking it's possible to get a combo in the first place. Similar things come up because of the way that people can land damage if you were dodging. And this game is full of what we like to call safe jumps, where making sure that you are in the right position is not quite as simple as that in the first place. Coloration of that particular thing made me wonder, wait, which costume did I pick again? You can find yourself in a situation, therefore, where you think you've dropped your combo, when it's really that, strictly speaking, yes, you've dropped the combo, but the game wasn't going to let you ever get it to work at that spacing or range anyway. It just isn't possible for it to work. Unfortunately for all of that, we can't actually seem to create any meaningful bots for this game, which puts a damper on the overall continual experience of learning those things under zero pressure. You can't necessarily get combos that only hit under certain scenarios if you don't understand what the scenarios are. One thing that can improve your capacity to get combos, though, is understanding when to shift into fake offense, or rather, to bait your opponent specifically so that your combo can be better. knowing which specific style of flow your opponent is planning to use in the first place matters a lot more than any specific thing that you can do to them. Which is why you'll probably find that even if you feel like you've been playing this game for a while since it's been out, there are obviously a bunch of people who are going to be extremely good, and if you don't feel as if you're in that set of people but have been playing for a while, it's probably because of something to do with your combo theory. Not necessarily because the game's neutral isn't complicated enough to need that, but more so that when you are getting rewarded in neutral, this game is basically 2 touches if you're really good. But those things both require setup of position a lot of the time. This can also be a good reason why you have to learn which ways to take damage and which characters will make you unable to do your damage, not necessarily because you can't play the game in general, but because your combos will be off. If you are playing a particularly offensive character, or one that can't afford to be pushed to the corner, but you don't necessarily think you've got good enough offense, one of your biggest powers is going to be making sure that you have the right spacing for your safe jumps and trick attacks. This is particularly meaningful against Launcher because the amount of time she can spend putting you in situations you don't want to be in can be very large. She basically can cover almost all of the screen at all times and never really has to stop attacking, which means you spend almost all of your time learning ways through her attacks or how to prevent certain people from doing certain things repeatedly. She also covers very large amounts of space with certain attacks she has. And if you don't have a way to cross the screen quickly enough, you're not really going to get anything out of it. Similarly, because of the way that certain moves interact, if you don't understand what exactly is going to happen, your fake offense isn't going to be fake at all. You're going to end up in spaces that involve you being hit where you didn't mean to. There are many attacks with longer startup that you feel you might be able to use as defense, but she can basically counter from halfway across the screen. Because Launcher can invalidate certain options that people have, you have to be able to figure out which things you have that are still mostly viable, and ways to set up so that the things you were no longer able to easily do become viable. That's the main one. Backdashing out of specific things she does is usually the easiest way to prevent her from having too much advantage. It may seem weird, but she simply can't easily always do things after hitting one button. And while you'd think the answer to this would usually be, okay, here's my chance, maybe she'll hit the wrong thing, or I should use my best move to get out of the situation, most of the time it's just that you don't want to be there at all, as the same way we fight most zoners. Recognizing that you are in the right position for whatever normals you have to work, and that your opponent can't necessarily stop you, is a big key flow. But because of this, you tend to run out of MP quite quickly. Meaning that you often have to go for at least some real pressure, even if it's just so that you don't have an MP deficit when you're ready to actually fight. This is definitely one of those characters, therefore, who requires you to watch when you have meter or don't have meter, and decide how you're going to push forward and how much you're going to push forward based on that. Because even if you get hit by her uppercut, you're not always in danger as a result of this. And it can be enough time to get back to that position where you have more meter. But even that only matters if you understand exactly what height her attacks are coming from and what spaces you are in yourself. So, in general, don't push too hard. You may be better off, if you are particularly good at defense, figuring out how to space yourself to make the player want to hit certain things. instead of solving the problem the other way. At least forcing your opponent to adapt will put additional stress on them, and you can start to work from there. But of course, if you're doing all that, you may not have enough time to focus on the combo theory at the same time. In general, characters in this game who have long attacks don't have particularly great reversal options as well, with Hitman being the basically best you get out of that and middle ground by most standards. Of course, the reach of your invincible moves tends to matter a lot more than anything else anyway, because once you've gotten far enough, your opponent no longer has to care. So an extremely long-range character can just basically ignore the fact that you have this invincible option for their stuff. They just have to make sure that whatever they're about to use can't be stopped by you in the position you need it to be stopped in. From the defense side, understanding whether or not you've actually got certain options matters a lot more than specifically going, I should react to this in time. Because what you think you can react to, what you are probably able to react to, and what your opponent is trying to make you react to are not necessarily very different most of the time. Surely, your opponent will find some times where they're just pushing on you to see what you can do. But once you've demonstrated that you can solve a problem in specific ways, it doesn't really come up anymore. It's random, let's say. If your invincible moves are not particularly strong because of other reasons, like being a very, very pressury character, both Berserker and Kunoichi have some issues with the way theirs work. the more likely you are to find problems in some other form. The lack of invincibility on the awakening isn't necessarily a problem, but it does lead to the same sort of situations and thoughts. You can't solve the problem by just hitting awakening. You have to be able to get to the position where the awakening damage is going to help you. For some of us, this is fine because the awakening buff you're getting is going to cause the situation to improve. But for Launcher, as an example, hers doesn't really get much better. She gets more white health damage, but that's not really what you tend to want in the same way when your health is already low. Because the flow and rhythm of battle is so consistently changing, you spend a lot of time trying to read whether or not your opponent is in a specific mind state at the time. But more importantly, you spend a lot of time controlling space to make sure that you are exactly at X point on the screen, or not. If you have a character who generally doesn't win interactions, pressure is often your best option, which means it is to your opponent's benefit to uppercut or use their invincible wake-up option more often. And that means you in turn must figure out more ways to get them to do it where you somehow don't actually get hit. Depending on what your options are, you can use your own, if you're really confident. And many characters have knockdowns that lead to, again, what we call safe jumps. Therefore, if you're becoming frustrated at anything related to your combo theory, spend more time not practicing the combo, but checking in training mode which spots your combo doesn't hit from. For example, I know not to go for certain things because I'm so sure that if I hit them, it will still fail. The max range for nearly any useful combo off of her 2S, as mentioned, is pretty clear to me now. But if you are fighting from that range most of the time because of the opponent's character, it can be a little hard if you've learned to do the combo for some reason. Of course, the issue will always be that once your opponent has learned your safe jump timing, defending it doesn't tend to be as difficult. It turns it right back into a guessing game. At which point, the real thing making the decision for you is whether or not you are likely to take more damage or less from being uppercut. And when we consider damage in this case, we also have to consider how far back you ended up going from your main planned position on screen. As well as thinking about if your opponent is going to take a lot of damage if they mess up. Because in general it makes very little sense to do an attack that will put you off where you want it to be when you could just move to that position and not actually do the pressure. This is the understanding that allows you to progress forward, because you can spend more time thinking about whether or not the thing you want to do is the thing that's happening. We can see by launcher spacing in this matchup that it's not necessarily going to be possible to just dodge through her stuff, whereas a character that actually just pressures you the whole time from the standing position doesn't have the same capacity. They can't decide for themselves whether or not you're going to be in a place that they can deal with or not. You get to dodge out by what they've done, not where they were. If your opponent understands enough about your character's combo theory, they can simply make sure that when you have a position where you can kill them, you will never actually be there. You will never reach the point where that combo or whatever is going to happen. Which is why the game mostly works. Despite the fact that so much of it can be massive amounts of damage from either side, the preconditions for that damage are not always as obvious to people, and they are often quite extensive preconditions. In this matchup, you'll spend almost all your time watching for spacings. Once you've got them right, it's easier by far. And if you've got them wrong, then you basically can't touch her. But the worst, if you could call it that part of this, is that it is easy to get caught up in the idea of trying to get your awakening attack on a character who will basically negate the potential for you to get it. With your main point being to learn to do it from the bait position. This is why you'll often notice that top play doesn't look like what you'd expect from your own level in a lot of games. The advanced strategies for a lot of characters don't look anything like the standard ones at all, which is why you'll notice sometimes people just blocking for really long periods because they're waiting for their opponent to try to get them opened up in a way that can actually be avoided. Too slow. There, for example, I'm pretty sure I could actually have done the combo, but I'm not absolutely sure because my opponent was in the air already. Nope, too slow. Again. The stream itself is probably going to close up shortly, but the lounge may stay open for a bit. There will be another lounge later, but I think we're still waiting on some change to this game. I think it did get the patch, or the primary patch. and people are now somewhat waiting for the next one. That, for example, only worked because of the precise move my opponent did, and that flame was only going to hit them once no matter what. Oh, that was supposed to be Frog, I think. This is for a setup more so than for the damage. If your character relies a lot on their MP to get them through situations, you're going to have a harder time in this matchup for the other reason as well. Simply put, if you keep on getting hit, you're usually still using up the MP. So be careful to make sure that you try to get some conversions if you've been clipped, just so you can get back to the MP regen state a little faster. You can pick up a lot of skills from other games in watching opponents and recognizing when their things are going to happen, but for every new game that pops up, applying those skills is another set of things to learn. And so all aboard the boat train we go. If you enjoy the sort of game where understanding spacing is really important, then you're probably going to get a lot out of this one. Particularly because it's precisely the game that a lot of people have been waiting for, where the execution of it isn't necessarily trippingly hard. Depends on your personal characterization and specific way of playing fighting games in general. But you definitely spend a lot more time in this game watching the spaces between than explicitly trying to get much else. I think that one actually would have worked. The game also has what we like to call jump-in crush attacks in it. Jump-in attacks that only work if the actual strike hits at the last moment, which is just another form of spacing that you have to learn. The normal opponent that you'll face for a while in this game is the one who will just set it up so they're jumping at you on your wake up, and you basically either have to assume it's a safe jump or for some other reason can't do anything about it. But that's not really the case in general. Ooh, out of MP. I wonder whether or not I can change the speed that the air down MP happens. Recovery afterward, that is. But I don't think it's a 2-2 move, so probably not. My opponent is similarly watching very precisely which spacing I'm at to know which pressure I'm most likely to go for because it's the safe one or the good one at that range. This is why sometimes it makes more sense to do things that don't make sense for pressure in order to get yourself out of situations. Conditioning your opponent to expect pressure of particular types will make them mismeasure spaces at least some of the time. That, for example, against a different opponent would have been a moment to bait a wake up, because I had enough health to absorb any throw, for example. But someone who saw that I had popped the awakening wouldn't necessarily have been thinking, oh, that was definitely going to hit me, fight's over. If I've not proven that I could hit it before, there's no reason for them to think that. As noted, we'll see some more later. But we've come to the end of our stream for tonight. Tonight in Europe, that is. You can find all of our bots at 2-mk.org, and we are going to be trying to get our bot that has now been labeled Big Fire released by the 7:30 Eastern Time, just before our next DNF stream. This is a bot for KOF 15, for those of you who are interested, and will probably give you lots of different things you can study and practice that are very similar to what you're seeing in here, and what I've been talking about for a while now. You can join us tomorrow as well for any Monday mishmashing battle lounge for Street Fighter V. And though we are not certain we will be having the Tuesday melt, Wednesday night in birth is a decent chance. Room's full. Well, it's probably not closing up too soon, so you can expect to be able to jump in, I think. I should check because it's often... Nope, completely full. So presume that you should be able to get in. I think I set this to 9 rather than 8. With all that said, this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.